So let's listen back in to that news conference earlier with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Trump.
Legal migration in Britain. And Prime Minister, if I can just ask, the President is all about drill, baby, drill in terms of trying to secure American energy and cut bills for Americans. Meanwhile, you are turning Britain's back on oil and gas in favour of renewable energies, such as wind turbines. Why do you think that you are right and he is wrong?
So we had millions of people flowing in, totally unchecked, totally unvetted from the Biden administration. 25 million, in my opinion, that would be about 25 million. They came from prisons. They came from mental institutions. They were gang members. They were drug dealers. They came from the Congo. They came from all parts of South America. They came from everywhere. Think of it. Prisons from the Congo being released into the United States. Prisons opened up in Venezuela and many other countries pouring into the United States. And I couldn't believe it. And one of the reasons I decided to run. I decided to run because I don't want to be controversial, but you see what's happened and you see all the information that's come out. We won in 2020 big. And I said, let's run. We got to run because I saw what was happening. And the worst thing that I saw was all of these people. You know, we've already solved it.
All right, let's try this again and bring Ed O'Keefe back in for us. Ed, I can see you. Hopefully you can hear me and we don't have any glitches this time around.
The helicopter's approaching. That's part of why we were having a comms issue, because it looks as if Marine One is arriving to take the president off to Stansted Airport and then back to the United States, where he's due back later tonight. We were saying there are disagreements between the two leaders about how to resolve the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. They obviously laid them out pretty clearly in this setting. It's unclear on the Ukraine situation that there's any acknowledgement or agreement by European countries and the UK to stop buying Russian oil, which is the president's current demand, saying that if we're going to ask India and China to do that, you guys have to stop doing it as well. And it's unclear whether there were any firm or detailed agreements on how to move forward and whether the president would support stiffer sanctions, for example, of any kind on Vladimir Putin. And on the Middle East, there's a clear disagreement. The UK, France, many other countries going to call for an independent Palestinian state, whereas the United States thinks that's a bad idea. The Trump administration does. And they're working towards peace somehow. The president's saying, look, if they release the hostages, that helps Hamas's case. I want to make a few things clear, though, Mugo, as long as you can still hear and see me.
Yes, we can.
About what went on in that room. If you were watching from the beginning, and I want to clarify this because we were asked about it by British reporters on our way out. Those that clapped as the president entered the room were not reporters, but were administration officials, and his own wife, the First Lady, who clapped as they came into the room, not the American reporters. On the American side of the room, we stand up because he's our head of state. The British, of course, did not because, as Prime Minister, he's just the head of government. So that's one atmospheric thing that I could see becoming, I just want to clarify. Also want to point out, the President called on 3 reporters, 2 who've been traveling with him this week from outlets that are incredibly favorable to him, to his administration. Real America's Voice and this British-based outlet called GB News, which is backed by his ally Nigel Farage, who may end up being a future prime minister and certainly is a popular conservative political leader right now. And then, of course, Fox News, which is not only getting an interview with the president later today, but, of course, has provided relatively favorable coverage to him at all hours of the day. So he gets questions from those reporters, and the British it was that ended up asking the ones that yielded the news and exposed some of the policy differences between the two leaders, at least in the foreign policy space. So this trip is now on the verge of wrapping up. I don't know if you can see the helicopters that have landed here at Chequers. This is the country estate of the British Prime Minister. Passes to whoever is serving in that role. This is like their Camp David. The home behind us was built in the 16th century and became the Prime Minister's back in the 1920s and has hosted other American leaders before. But it, quick trip, second unprecedented state visit for the president. And as our colleagues were saying earlier, both of these leaders can leave this with some sense of accomplishment and some sense that they got what they were looking for, certainly in the trade realm. And in the case of the president and the White House, they were very eager to accept this invitation, in part because the imagery of yesterday that pageantry they knew would be seen back in the United States and around the world, and signal how seriously this kingdom, at least, takes this president.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the context you explained as well when it comes to the questions and the clapping as well that the president received during that joint news conference. Thanks for your time. Now let's bring in CBS News White House reporter OIivia Rinaldi. She is live in England. OIivia, thank you for joining us. What are your takeaways from what the president had to say at that joint press conference today?
We'll move over here at Buckingham Palace, which is about 90 minutes away from Chequers, where Ed O'Keefe just was. We are listening very closely to this press conference, and a lot of notable moments from that press conference. One in particular I want to point out was a very public disagreement from President Trump with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and that was on the issue of recognizing a Palestinian state. President Trump was asked whether he would also recognize a Palestinian state. He went on to talk about remembering October 7th, his conversations with the hostages that have come to the Oval Office to meet with the president. And at the end of it, he said, I have a disagreement with the prime minister on that front. So quite notable there, especially as next week we're heading into the United Nations meeting, the General Assembly in New York, where certainly this is going to be a top topic there. The president also said at one point, and he called this breaking news, he said that the U.S. is trying to get back Bagram Air Base. Now, that is the air base. It was the largest in the world after the 9/11 attacks when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. It was a joint base between the U.S. and NATO, and it was extremely large air base that was based out of Afghanistan, where there was a lot of missions based out of there. And President Trump said they're trying to get it back. So a lot of questions about what exactly that means. Of course, after the fall of Afghanistan, when U.S. troops withdrew, the U.S. gave up this air base, and it's under Taliban control. The president has consistently lamented that it's now under Taliban control, and it's also very close to the border of China, where he says they are making nuclear weapons over there. So this is something that he says his administration is hoping to get back. So we'll be watching for any negotiations on that. I also do want to point out a question that was asked about the firing of Ambassador Mendelsohn over the scandal with Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, we know that he was fired just last week before this huge state visit over emails that came up about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Trump jumped in to say, when Keir Starmer was asked about this and why he fired him, he said, I don't know him. And then Keir Starmer went on to say some information came to light last week which wasn't available when he was appointed. So that's why the prime minister made that decision then. And he quickly pivoted to talk about something else. So as Epstein has kind of hung over this entire state visit, they were asked about it very pointedly there, and both men quickly deflected, saying they don't know much of the situation. So a lot of key moments there today, certainly a lot to chew on. But by and large, this state visit went off without a hitch. The president got a second state visit here in the United Kingdom. He sat down at a state dinner last night by King Charles, Queen Camilla, and then this press conference went largely as expected. President Trump was himself. He talked about his normal issues of immigration and energy prices, and Keir Starmer seems to walk away with it with a deal in hand for the people of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, Olivia, I want to stick with that for just a second, because we know, I mean, these two men, they're different, and they differ on certain topics. For example, when it comes to recognizing a Palestinian statehood. But just how significant is this visit for the president, who, again, is seemingly forging a strong relationship with the more liberal Starmer?
Well, it's a good point. You know, these men come from two different backgrounds, politically and ideologically, but they formed a bit of a friendship. You know, when President Trump was here in July for a visit to his property in Scotland, Keir Starmer came over and played golf with him, kind of meeting President Trump where he was at, doing what he likes, a round of golf, certainly in the Scottish countryside. Very nice. They have a very close relationship. You know, Starmer met with Trump at the White House back in February, where he hand-delivered that written note from King Charles inviting him for this second state visit, which is usually something that's asked of by the government and then carried out by the diplomatic head of the government, which is King Charles. So they've had several meetings. They have a very close friendship. Even at one point, President Trump reached over and patted Keir Starmer on the back when he was asked a question about the Palestinian state. So, you know, it's been interesting to watch their relationship unfold, but it seems that they're walking away from it quite stronger than when they came in.
Yeah, certainly seems like it. Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much for joining us. And now I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio. Ramy, thank you for your time. Can you walk us through the response from the British perspective when those two men met?
Sure, Mugo. For British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, I think this really couldn't have gone any smoother or better for him. And a lot was riding on basically his political stability and the economy of this country. At their press conference today, we saw that they were far more onside than they were offside. And the big headline clearly that they wanted to talk about was this partnership, was this synergy in technology, in big tech, U.S. tech companies investing billions and billions, hundreds of billions of pounds into into U.K. technology, basically forming and building the backbone for future AI in this country, some kind of maybe 21st century AI railroad infrastructure here. They talked about how they wanted to be united, for example, in defense and technology. Some of the numbers that we were talking about earlier in terms of 150 billion pounds that U.S. companies would invest in the U.K. In terms of AI infrastructure and data centers here. And I was taking a running tally of other issues that they talked about over that press conference that went about 45 minutes. For the most part, again, on side, technology, defense, same. Israel, for the most part, same until they got to the Palestinian state issue, which you guys talked about. Immigration was another thing. There was one very pointed question from a journalist in that press conference who asked how Donald Trump managed to stop basically illegal immigration through the southern border, and then pivoted and asked President Trump how he would advise Prime Minister Starmer on what to do. Prime Minister Starmer basically said that it is a kind of work in project. He said that there is a returns avenue, a returns channel that they're trying out, but he tried to skirt around that. But that clearly very much is an issue here in the United Kingdom with illegal immigration and with people coming in to this country. Another thing that they were on side, though, was Russia and Ukraine there. But again, glossing over most of those differences, this really was probably one of the best ways that Prime Minister Starmer could come out of this. I will say, though, that it's also important to see what they didn't talk about. One thing they didn't talk about were tariffs, Trump tariffs of 25% still on steel and aluminum. So that was something, that still has to be figured out. Another one is a digital services tax, which is basically a 2% tax on tech companies. Of course, a lot of tech companies in the mix over the past couple of days, Google, NVIDIA, what have you, Amazon. If you make money here, you have to send 2% back to the U.S. People here have been very much against that. That also was not touched.
All right. Ramy Inocencio, thank you so much for helping us break all that down. Appreciate your time.